Good evening and Shabbat Shalom. It is a pleasure to be here with you. It is a pleasure to be here at any time. And do you know what the best thing is about being a retired rabbi and filling in for a colleague? As you step off the bima at the end of the service, you think to yourself, I don't have to do this next week. But I am, and I mention this as I always am, immensely pleased and honored that my rabbi calls upon me to fill in for him when he is gone. The measure of trust is significant, and you have to be in this place to understand what that means. And it means a great deal to me, and I am deeply honored to fill in for my friend and colleague. So, by way of introduction, let's introduce our service with the singing of Hinei Ma Tov, which is on page 128. ובמנעים שבת נחינם יחד. הנה מה טוב ובמנעים שבת נחינם יחד. הנה מה טוב ובמנעים שבת נחינם יחד. הנה מה טוב ובמנעים שבת נחינם
Shabbat Shalom.
Now, the lighting of the Shabbat candles is a line of demarcation separating the weekday from Shabbat. So it is this act that inaugurates Shabbat. If you don't light candles, it's just an ordinary day. Okay? So we make the day into Shabbat with the lighting of candles, and I call on Jeff and Mary Berkowitz-Klar to come and honor us with the lighting of the Shabbat candles, which you will find on page 120. Amen. We continue with the singing of Lecha Dodi on page 138. Now, Lecha Dodi is a fairly recent addition to the liturgy. During the late Middle Ages, a community of mystics sprung up in the town of Tzfat in Israel, and they would come in at sunset, and one of their number wrote this poem of love and honor, personifying Shabbat as the Queen of Days. It was their actions, this mystical community, that developed the liturgical practice of Kabbalat Shabbat, the beginning of the service with the singing of psalms and hymns up until Baruch Hu, because the actual service itself does not begin until you get to the Baruch Hu. But they called this service, this sort of mini service before the service, Kabbalat Shabbat, welcoming Shabbat. So we continue now on page 138 with Kabbalat Shabbat and Lecha Dodi.
Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. La la lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala. Penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor v'dibur echad, Hishmiyanu el hamyachad Adonai echad u'shamo echad, L'shemu tiferet v'litila la la lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat v'chu v'nercha, ki hine kol ha'bracha, merosh mikadem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshava tequila la la lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala, gam b'simcha u'v'tzola, toch emunei am segula, boi chala, boi chala. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi, likrat kala, penei penei Shabbat nekabela.
Now, I have to tell you also that the Kabbalat Shabbat service is especially dear to me. A number of years ago, I had surgery, and as a part of the surgery, you know, they intubate you and all that, and he bumped and nicked the right recurrent nerve to the vocal cord. Did I get the anatomy right there, Dan? Right recurrent nerve. Right recurrent nerve for the vocal cord. Whatever it was, at the end of the surgery, my voice was like this. And I was examined by several ENT people who said, this is permanent. Everybody's dream come true, a rabbi with laryngitis. Oh. You know? And it was one Friday evening after 2-3 months, we were doing Kabbalat Shabbat, and the psalm goes, Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash Ki Niflaot Asa. Sing to Adonai a new song, for he has accomplished miracles. And as I sang that line, my voice switched like that.
Wow. Great story.
Just like that. I had no idea that it was coming, and so, God really does do miracles. Although, got my preaching voice back again. It depends on where you sit as to how much you appreciate that. We'll continue now on page 144 with the Chatzi Kaddish.
Yitkadash v'yitkadash shemei Rabbi.
Amen.
V'yalma divrach yute v'yamlich malchute.
B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uv'zman kariv.
V'himeru.
Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba mevorach le'olam u'le'yamaya yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yithalei v'yithalal
Shemei Dekudesha Berichu.
Leila min kol berchata v'shirata
Tushbechata v'nechemata Damiran Be'alma.
v'himeru.
Amen. We continue on page 146. We invite those who are able to rise for Baruch Hu. Oops. Forgot this.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
We'll continue at the bottom of page 148. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening.
Baruch atah Adonai HaMaharim Haravim.
We'll continue now with the singing of Ahavat Olam, which is found on page 150.
Ahavat
Olam Beit Yisrael Amehavta Torah Mitzvot Chukim U'Mishpatim Otanu Limadeta Alkein Adonai Eloheinu Shochbeinu U'Bekumenu Nasiach Bechukecha B'nizman ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב Israel. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people, Israel. We continue on page 152 with the Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed.
Please be seated, and we'll continue with the singing of the Ahavta on page 154.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך, בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך, ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני Adonai Elohechem.
Please turn to page 158 for the singing of Mi Chamocha.
Ya bum bum bim bim bum, ya bum bum bim bum, ya bum bum bim bim bum, ya bum bum bim bum, ya dai 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 dai, ya bum bum bim bum, ya dai 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 dai, ya bum bum bim bum. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nehedar b'kodesh. Noati lo sefele, Noati lo sefele. Yam bum bum bim bim bum, yam bum bum bim bum, yam bum bum bim bim bum, yam bum bum bim bum. Yai dai 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 dai, yam bum bum bim bum, yai dai 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 dai, yam bum bum bim bum. Malchutecha ra'u banecha, bokei hayam לפני משה, זה אלי, ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. יבם בם בים בם, יבם בם בים בם, ya bum bum bim bim bum ya bum bum bim bum yai dai 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 ya bum bum bim bum yai dai 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 ya bum bum bim bum.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. We continue with the singing of Vishamru on page 162.
Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת, לדורתם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורתם ברית עולם. בית ראובן בני ישראל, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורתם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני, עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורתם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורתם ברית עולם.
We'll turn to page 164 as we recite the Tefillah on the even-numbered pages. Those who are able may rise. Here we go.
Adonai
Sifatai tiftahu fi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu,
Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak,
Elohei Yaakov,
Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, v'Konei HaKol, v'Zocher Chastir v'Imahot, u'mevii geula לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה
Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Magen. Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayeh HaKol Atah V'Hoshia. Chayim B'Chesed Mechayeh HaKol B'Rachamim Rabim. Noflim V'Rofei Cholim Matir Asurim U'Mekayem Emunato Michamocha Ba'agevurot U'Midom Melech Melech Memit U'Mechayeh U'Matzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman Atah Hachayot HaKol. Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayeh HaKol. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who seek you find holiness in that seeking. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God.
Baruch Atah Adonai
El HaKadosh. We'll resume our seats. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch Atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Blessed are you, Adonai. You make Shabbat holy. We'll continue on page 178 with the singing of Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech adon lekol hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon lekol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov b'einecha levarech et amecha Yisrael. V'chol tu v'chol shalom b'shlomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Tassim leolam, Tassim leolam.
We continue with a moment of silent prayer. Elohai nitzor lishoni meira, usfatai medaber mema, velimkazane nafshi tidom, v'nashi ke'afar lakol tiyeh.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Adonai. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh, say shalom Lomar. Say shalom aleinu. Ve'achol Yisrael. Ve'imru amen. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu. Ve'achol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
On a smoking volcanic peak, a bit over 3,000 years ago, our people gathered, and the Torah relates that the mountain quaked and fire came shooting out the top. The mountain that they had been following for the last 49 days, providing a pillar of cloud at night for them to see in the distance, pillar of cloud by day, and the fire at night, always heading toward that mountain. And what happened? Well, there are many stories in the rabbinic literature. One explanation says that Moses spent 40 days and nights up there writing the Torah as God dictated it to him. And in another place, the rabbinic literature said, no, all that Moses got was the 10 Commandments. And another rabbi said, no, he got only the first of the Aseret HaDibrot. Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am Adonai your God. And another rabbi said, no, he did not. All he got was the first letter of the first word of the first commandment. Now, what is the first letter of the first word of the first commandment? It is the letter Aleph. And what sound does Aleph make? It's a silent letter. It makes no sound at all. It's the sound you make when you open your mouth and begin to speak. Try it. Open your mouth. and then stop before the first sound comes out. That is the sound that the Aleph makes. And that is what God gave us on Mount Sinai. What is in that sound? The sound that is no sound at all. It is potential. It is nothing, and it is everything. For God gave us the ability to see from that first Aleph all the things that we might do with Torah. And so we turn now to page 364 as we commence our Torah service, and we relive that experience on Sinai. Tzion tetzeh Torah, ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, u'devar Adonai miYerushalayim. Those Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Echad Eloheinu Ol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo Gadlu Adonai iti Romema Shemo Yachdav. Okay. See what it looks like in there. A little bit further on. And we'll go to here. Tachat ha'etz vayochelu v'yomehel la'asot oto. Tachat ha'etz vayochelu, right to there. The Parshat HaShavua is Vayera, he appeared, and it concerns an appearance of 3 visitors to Abraham. We will see, and I'll be talking more about this later on, that Abraham rushes to greet them. And he says, you must be tired. Come, wash your feet. Lay down here under this tree. Get some rest. And while you're resting, let me get you a little bit of bread and some water, seeing that you have been traveling through the desert and you must be tired and hungry. So he promises them a bit of bread and water. And then he tells Sarah, to get some of the finest flour that they have and make cakes with it. And then he rushes to get the calf, his prize calf, and he prepares that for the dinner, along with all sorts of side dishes. So this is the piece of bread and a glass of water that Abraham promised to his guests. And from this we have Daber me'at ve'aseh harbe. Speak little and do much. Abraham promises just a little bit, and he does so much for strangers who turn out to be not ordinary strangers. So for those of you who have the Torah book, we're on page 122, and it's Parshat Vayera. And if you want, I can give you this, or you got it there? Okay. Ta'amod la Torah. We call to the Torah Ruth Holt.
Ruthie.
Let's see. Hine. Okay.
Baruch et Adonai Hamboach.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach L'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamboach L'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Hold this, please. Amen. Vaya elav Adonai be'elonei mamre v'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel kechom hayom vayisa einav vaya v'hinei shlosha anashim nitzavim alav vayarot tzlikatam mipetach ha'ohel vayishtachu arza Vayoma Adonai Imna Matzati Chen Be'enecha Al Na Ta'avo Me'al Avdecha Vayikachna Me'at Mayim V'rachatzu Raglechem V'hisha'anu Tachat Ha'etz Va'ekach Pat Lechem Vayisardu Libechem Achat Ta'avohu Ki Aken Avatem Al Avdechem Vayomhu Ken Ta'aseh Ka'asher Dibarta Vayimaher Avraham Ha'ohela El Sarah Vayoma Mahari Shalosh Se'im Kemach Solet Lushi Ve'asi Ugot Ve'el Habakar Avraham Vayikach Ben Habakar Achvatov Vayitein El Hana'a Ve'el Hana'a Vayimahel Asot Oto ויקח חמא וחלב ובין אבקה אשר עשה וייתן לפניכם והוא עומד עליהם תחת העץ ויאכלו. ברוך אתה
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Adonai appeared to him by the oak trees of Mamre. He was sitting at the entranceway of his tent during the hot part of the day. He looked up and he saw, and there were 3 men standing close by him. And he looked and he ran up to greet them from the entranceway of his tent, and he bowed down to the ground. And he said, "My lords, if I have found favor in your sight, then please don't leave my tent, don't leave here. Let me bring you a little bit of water so that you can wash your feet and you can rest under the tree over here." And he brought them a loaf of bread, and he set it down before them. And he let some bread be brought, and let it be given to you, seeing that you have come this distance, because that is what you came here for, to visit your servant. And they said to him, "Go and do as you have spoken." And Abraham hurried back to the tent to Sarah, and he said, "Hurry, get 3 measures of the finest flour, knead it, and make it into cakes." And then he took the calf. And Abraham ran and he took the calf, young and fat, and he gave it to his servant. And they hurried to prepare it. And then he took butter and milk and the calf which had been prepared, and he set it down before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate.
חלב ובשר. I don't understand.
It's before the Torah.
Before the...
So you could do that. You could have a cheeseburger.
You're going to address the Torah with you.
What?
You're going to address the Torah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Those who are able will rise as the Torah is raised.
Ready for Hagbah?
Yep, we're ready. Zot HaTorah asher lifnei bnei Yisrael beyad Moshe. This is the Torah which Moses set before the people of Israel to fulfill the word of God. Now, Ruth just mentioned to me in an aside a couple of minutes ago, noting that the Torah says that Abraham served them the meat with milk and butter. How can you do that? That isn't kosher, is it? And anybody know the answer to that one? Can't hear you. It's not kosher now, but it was back then, because the law separating meat and milk had not yet been developed. And so it was perfectly acceptable to have a cheeseburger. Would Moses have eaten a cheeseburger? Certainly. No law against it in his day. That law about mixing meat and milk developed, more than 1,000 years after Moses. v'tomcha me'osha deracheha dachenom v'chol netivoteha Shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Nashuva Kadesh Kadesh Yameinu Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem.
What? The three angels? The
Well,
visitors?
it's a good question.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll turn now to page 371 for Misheberach. Hmm?
Casualty during the
Oh, okay. Was it something I said? As we offer the blessing for healing this Shabbat, we are mindful of Tsiva Mina Bat Tzvi Hirsch, V'ita Sherry Lynn Kochman, Robert Dower and Celia Schwartz, Janet and Jim Dias, Alan Elias, Gerald Friedkin, Zena Garber, Bobby Jeanette, Ed Jantz, Celia, Jeff Levy, Celia, Yvette Mickenberg, Art Phillips, Matt Sagel, Ross Schoonmaker, Michael Schwartz, again Celia, Alan Stein and Sharon Goldman, Gail Tabor, Marcy Durnell, and Michael Walsh. And if there are any other names, okay. Anyone else? Yeah. Thank you. And there are also those for whom we pray privately. We also pray for people over the world fighting COVID-19. And I invite, no, nobody's on Zoom on this Shabbat, are they?
No, they are there, though.
They are there?
You can-
Okay, so you can say your
ask
names.
them, right, ask
I
them to
won't
say-
hear you, but you will. And for all, may the Holy One send healing and shelter in protection. We continue on page 371.
Misheberach Avotenu Mekor Habracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misheberach imotenu Mekor habracha lahavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema. the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Now, this week's Parsha, Vayera, includes some wonderful stories about Abraham, the first Jew. Now, last week, Rabbi Eric, the other Rabbi Eric, mentioned that in the 14th chapter of Genesis, Abraham is referred to as, remember this one, Abraham the Hebrew. And I'd like to revisit that again because this chapter in general and these words in particular are of great significance to our Jewish faith. First, I'd like to point out that the author of chapter 14 appears nowhere else in the Torah. The different authors of the Torah are referred to as J, E, P, and D, based on various features of their writing. But this author, the author of chapter 14, is not J, not E, not P, and not D. He is referred to as X. He wrote this chapter and nothing else, at least nothing else that has come down to us in these days, and it is of particular significance that he uses the expression Abraham the Hebrew. Why so? Because nowhere else in the Torah or in the rest of the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptural canon, is anyone else referred to as the Hebrew. Why? Because they were all Hebrews. This is a book about Hebrews, written by Hebrews, so there is no need for anyone to use that expression. They knew who they were. But the fact that X refers to Abraham as a Hebrew means that X is not himself a Hebrew. And he refers to Abraham as a Hebrew because X is an outsider to that group of people known as Hebrews. And it is very clear from his writing that he has a great deal of admiration for Abraham the Hebrew, and it is this that we will look into on this Shabbat as we segue into the next parsha, Vayera, and I will be looking into some of the midrashim on this parsha. It is the midrash that enables us not only to read between the lines of the Torah, but between the words, and indeed even between the letters in the Torah. The midrash stresses that Abraham was able to put his priorities in order. And here's a story about that. The midrash relates that Abraham spoke with Shem, who was the eldest son of Noah, who was one of the survivors of the flood, and he was quite elderly at this time. And Abraham asked Shem what was the particular merit that he possessed that caused God to keep him alive while he was in the ark. And he said, I survived because I did tzedakah. Abraham was astounded. How could you? What is that supposed to mean? There were no poor people in the ark for you to give tzedakah to. So what do you mean you did tzedakah? Shem smiled, and he said, I mean that I did tzedakah for the animals. I stayed awake night and day, making sure that they were well fed and well taken care of. Hearing this, Abraham nodded his head, and he said, if so, then how much the more important is it for us to look after the well-being of humanity? And so Abraham decided that he would make the care and feeding of people a mainstay of his life. And that was how he came to be sitting at the entrance of his tent, as the Torah relates, on the day that 3 strangers came to visit him. But I'm getting ahead of my story. After learning this from Shem, Abraham, we are told, erected a large tent that had 4 entrances, so that no matter which direction a wayfarer approached from, he would know that the welcome mat was out for him. And everyone who came to Abraham's tent was greeted with great hospitality, with plenty of food and shelter for the night. Soon the word spread around the desert that a wonderful man had opened such a magnificent hotel. Hotel? Yes, that's what the Torah says. It says Abraham established an Eshel. Right? What is an Eshel? Ruthie? You know what an Eshel is? Eshel. Achila, shtia, velina. Food, drink, and rest. Well, it's an acronym. It says that Abraham did this. And anybody who came there knew that they were going to be treated well. So Abraham had his hotel with free food and lodging, and he desired only to do good for people. But once Abraham had fed them, then he said to them, having eaten so well, you must now recite a bracha. What's a bracha? Well, it's a prayer, thanking God for certain things. In this case, the food that we have enjoyed. Well, what should we say? And Abraham would say these words after me. Baruch el olam she'achalnu mishalo. Blessed be the God of the universe whose food we have eaten. Okay? And he taught them the bracha. They would recite it, and that was the payment. But if they refused, saying, we don't know this El Olam of yours, why should we pray to him? Then Abraham would say to them, fair enough. You don't have to take on my religion if you don't like it. You have to pay me for your food. How much? For the wine, 10 pieces of gold. For the meat, another 10 pieces of gold. For the bread, again, 10 pieces of gold. That is excessive, they protested. Indeed, Abraham would say, and tell me, you have just come out of the desert. What is the price of a loaf of bread in the middle of the desert when you are hungry? And they would bless God. But Abraham's education was not yet complete. One day it happened that Abraham took in an old man, fed him, treated him in the customary manner, and when it was all over, Abraham said to him, say a bracha. Whereupon the old man responded, yes, indeed, we must give thanks for our food. Well, Abraham was overjoyed. Clearly the word was getting out that there was this man who wanted you to pray and give thanks for your food. And here was a wayfarer that he didn't even need to teach. But Abraham's joy was short-lived. It quickly turned to ashes, quite literally, because the old man began to offer thanks to the fire god for having cooked the food. Abraham was outraged, and he promptly drove the man from his tent. Idolatry in my tent, get out, into the cold desert night. That night, as he lay asleep, Abraham heard the voice of God calling to him. Abraham, why did you drive that old man out into the desert? And Abraham responded, God, did you hear what he was trying to do? Perform avodah zarah, idolatry, in my own tent? Yes, Abraham, God said, I know very well what he is up to. You see, I have been putting up with that old fool for nearly 70 years. Don't you think you could have tolerated him for just one night? And so Abraham got out of his bed and began following the footsteps, trying to locate the old man. And he found him against a rock, huddled in his cloak against the cold of the desert's night air. And he begged him to return with him to his tent. After the old man had warmed up, he asked Abraham, why did you come and get me? And Abraham responded, my God told me to. If that is how your God makes you act, the old man responded, then it is indeed fitting that we should give thanks to him. And he joined Abraham in saying, Baruch Elolam she'achalnu mishalo. Blessed is the God of the universe, whose food we have eaten. And then he also said, and blessed is the God of Abraham, who teaches his children to act in such a manner. And so Abraham was now deemed worthy to welcome the three distinguished visitors into his tent. And now we leave Abraham behind in Parshat Vayera, and we reflect on ourselves and on our deeds. Are we worthy to welcome the three visitors into our homes? Have we fed the poor? Have we fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah as Shem and Abraham did? There are many Jewish charities that afford us the opportunity, so I won't trouble you with naming them, save to tell you that if you do as Abraham did, which was to promise little and deliver much, then you too will be worthy to greet the holy visitors into your homes. Ken Yehi Ratzon, be this God's will. We'll continue on page 568 of the second Hebrew paragraph as we rise to recite the Aleinu.
The Aleinu, I think Aleinu, that's 586.
586?
I
Did
thought you said 568.
I probably did.
Okay.
586.
586.
We'll start on 586 and we'll continue on page by page going to 5.
Yes. It's that axe throwing. It's all that axe throwing.
Leinu leshabeach la'adon hakol, latet gedula leyotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama. שלא שם חלקנו כהם, גורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. And please turn to page 591. נאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יראה אדוני אחד ושמו At this moment in our service, we now call to mind our own beloved dead, and we pray on their behalf. We voice the confidence that they are remembered for blessing. And I ask that those in mourning or remembering the anniversary of the death of a loved one to rise, if you are able, when their name is mentioned. We remember the yahrzeits, the anniversaries of the deaths of Caroline Bash Gold, Maurice David Berman, Donald Cohen, Theodore W. Davis, Clara Eisenberg, Marvin Lewis Gelb, Elizabeth Weinstein Height, Estelle Hirsch, Manuel Lax, Judge Yale Matskin, Nettie Pashkus, Sidney L. Silverman, Michael Sochin, Nancy Stammelman, Julia Stein, and we ask our worshipers in the sanctuary, should you have a dear one to add, to please rise and say their name now. And we ask our virtual worshipers, should you have a dear one to add, to say their name. And we also remember the dead this week from COVID-19. And each Shabbat we mention 6 names amongst the 6 million murdered in the Holocaust, the Shoah. This week we remember Abraham Berezniak, Rachel Leja Berezniak, Shendel Berezniak, Rivka Berezniak, Nechama Berezniak, Pesha Berezniak. In remembrance, in solidarity, and on behalf of those for whom there is no one but us to say Kaddish, we now invite all to rise, if you are able, as we turn to page 598 and we recite the Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'omad divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayei chon v'yomei chon, uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'zman karev v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach la'olam ula'almei almayah. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemei dekudesha b'rechu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'oma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oh. Do we have anyone here who is making announcements? Or?
I believe that our president, Mr. Reps.
There he comes.
Can all sit.
Unless you like standing for announcements.
Good evening, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome, everyone here in the sanctuary and our Vimeo contingent.
Get it closer to you.
Hear me okay? Thank you. Okay.
Let's see if
I
this
think you can hear me. So thank you very much, Rabbi Silver, for this evening's service and a fascinating sermon, and Linda for your lovely music. Tomorrow, 10:30 a.m., Torah study with Rabbi Eric, only online via Zoom. Email the rabbi at Southbury.org should you need the code. That is going to cover the book of Leviticus, which includes some of Judaism's most sacred understandings. Newcomers and the curious are always welcome. Sunday at 11 o'clock, join the Sisterhood, Rabbi Eric, and the Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism for a special Zoom conversation on voting rights, a Jewish value. Contact B'nai Sisters at Gmail. That's B'naiSisters@gmail.com, or Rabbi Eric for the code. Next Friday night, as usual, services at 7:30, and it is the Sisterhood Shabbat. And it's not too late. We're still recruiting in-person volunteers for our tech corps to help with our live stream of services. Please speak to Rabbi, or you can contact me at president@BnaiIsraelSouthbury.org, and you learn how to run the cameras and the soundboard. First meeting lesson is actually this Tuesday at 7 o'clock. So if you're interested, please let me know, and we'll get you hooked up. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Other announcements?
Nope, but
Any jokes?
no.
And our closing will be Adon Olam, which is on 6/25.
Yes, you're right. Awfully loud. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Asa B'chev Sochol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'acharei Tiklok HaKol Livado Yimlok Nora V'hu Hayav V'hu Hoveh V'hu Yiyeh B'tifara V'hu Echad V'ein Sheni Lehamshilo Lehakbira Beli Reshit Beli Takli Misra. Vehu Eli v'chai goali, v'tzur chevli be'etzara, vehu nisi humanosli, menat kosi biyom echra. Biato afkid ruhi, beheti shan v'hahira, v'himruki keviyati, Adonali velohira. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much, Rabbi Silver.
Thank you.
It was
It's
inspiring.
always a pleasure to be here with you. I look forward to these occasions. Okay, King.
I loved it.
Thank you.
I loved what you did. What was the word? I couldn't.
An Ashel. Ashel. Aleph, Shin, Lamed. Ashel.
Ashel. Ashel is a